Margaret Wilson stood at the kitchen window of her massive Beverly Hills mansion, watching the new nanny play with her twin daughters in the backyard. The woman was young, maybe 25, with long, dark hair that caught the afternoon sunlight. Her name was Sophia, and she had been working for the Wilson family for only 3 weeks. Something about Sophia made Margaret's stomach twist with an ugly feeling she couldn't name. Maybe it was how naturally the girls took to her, or how Sophia's laugh echoed through the house like music. Margaret had never been good with children. Even her own. She preferred the quiet of her office, the control of business meetings, the predictable world of numbers and deals. Margaret was not just any housewife. She was the CEO of Wilson Industries, a company worth over $2 billion that she had built from nothing. Her husband David was a quiet man who managed their personal investments and stayed home with the children. People often whispered about their unusual arrangement, but Margaret didn't care. She had worked too hard to let anyone's opinions matter. The kitchen was her least favorite room in the house. It was too warm, too bright, with its white marble counters and expensive appliances that she never used. The cook usually prepared their meals, but today was the cook's day off. Margaret had decided to make dinner herself, something she rarely did. She was heating oil in a large pan, planning to fry some chicken for the girls. The oil bubbled and spat as it grew hotter. Margaret found herself staring at it, lost in dark thoughts about how much her life had changed since Sophia arrived. Before Sophia, the house had been quiet and orderly. The previous nanny, Mrs. Chen, had been with them for 5 years. She was older, professional, and kept to herself. The children respected her but never laughed with her the way they did with Sophia. Mrs. Chen had left suddenly 2 months ago, claiming she needed to care for her sick mother in China. Margaret had always suspected there was more to her departure, but she never investigated. David had found Sophia through an expensive nanny agency. Her references were perfect. Her background check was clean, and she had a degree in early childhood education. On paper, she was everything they needed. But something about her felt wrong to Margaret. Like a puzzle piece that almost fit, but not quite. The oil in the pan was getting very hot now, almost ready for cooking. Margaret could hear Sophia's voice through the open window, teaching the girls a song in what sounded like Spanish. Her daughters were giggling and trying to repeat the words. Margaret felt that familiar twist in her stomach again, stronger this time. She had tried to find fault with Sophia's work, but the young woman was nearly perfect. She was always on time, kept the children's rooms spotless, helped with homework without being asked, and even volunteered to work late when Margaret had important business dinners. The girls adored her, and David seemed impressed by her dedication. But Margaret noticed things others didn't. She noticed how Sophia sometimes stared at the family photos in the hallway, particularly the ones of David from his college years. She noticed how Sophia's eyes would follow David when he walked through a room, though she was always careful to look away quickly. Most of all, Margaret noticed how Sophia asked subtle questions about the family's history, their finances, and their daily routines. The oil was now smoking slightly, ready for cooking. Margaret reached for the chicken, but her hand froze as she heard something that made her blood run cold. Through the window, she could hear Sophia talking to the girls, but now she was speaking in English, and her voice had changed completely. "Your daddy is a very special man," Sophia was saying to 8-year-old Emma and Lily. "Did you know he used to be different before he met your mommy? He had a different life, with different friends." Margaret's heart began to pound. What did Sophia know about David's past? More importantly, why was she sharing it with the children? Margaret had always protected her family from certain truths about David's life before they met. Some secrets were meant to stay buried. She moved closer to the window, straining to hear more. The oil continued to bubble behind her, forgotten for the moment. "What do you mean different?" little Lily asked, in her innocent voice. Sophia glanced toward the house, and for a moment, her eyes met Margaret's through the window. The look that passed between them was electric and dangerous. Sophia's sweet, caring expression melted away for just a second, replaced by something much more calculating. "Oh, nothing important, sweetheart," Sophia said quickly, her gentle nanny voice returning. "Just that. Grown-ups sometimes change when they fall in love. Should we go inside and help your mommy with dinner?" Margaret stepped back from the window, her mind racing. That look in Sophia's eyes had confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't random. Sophia wasn't here by accident or because of a job agency. She was here for a specific reason, and it had something to do with David's past. Margaret thought about the secrets she had worked so hard to keep buried. David's gambling addiction from his 20s, the debts he had accumulated, the people he had borrowed money from, people who didn't forget and didn't forgive. Margaret had paid those debts when they got married, using her growing business fortune to clean up his mess. She thought they had escaped that world forever. But what if they hadn't? What if someone had sent Sophia to their home? What if everything about their perfect life was about to come crashing down? The back door opened, and Margaret heard the girls' voices getting closer. Sophia was bringing them inside, just as she had said she would. Margaret turned back to the stove, trying to compose herself. But her hands were shaking. "Mrs. Wilson?" Sophia's voice came from the doorway, sweet and concerned. "Are you all right? You look upset." Margaret turned to face her. And for a moment, the two women stood in silence. The oil continued to bubble violently in the pan between them. Margaret could see her daughters behind Sophia, their faces bright and happy from their time outside. "I'm fine," Margaret said. But her voice came out harder than she intended. "Just concentrating on cooking." Sophia stepped further into the kitchen, and Margaret noticed she was moving with purpose, not the casual way she usually walked. There was something different about her posture. More confident, less submissive. "You know," Sophia said, her voice still gentle but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking about what a lucky woman you are, Mrs. Wilson. Such a beautiful home, such a successful business, such a loving family." Margaret's grip tightened on the pan handle. "Yes, I am very fortunate. It must have taken a lot of work to build all this," Sophia continued, moving closer. "And a lot of sacrifice. Sometimes, people have to do things they're not proud of, to protect the people they love." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. Sophia knew. Whatever she was here for, whatever she wanted, she knew about David's past. Maybe she knew about the debts, the dangerous people, the money Margaret had paid to make it all go away. "Girls, why don't you go wash your hands for dinner?" Margaret said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "But we want to help cook," Emma protested. "Now," Margaret said more firmly, and something in her tone made both girls hurry out of the room without another word. As soon as they were alone, the atmosphere in the kitchen changed completely. Sophia's sweet smile faded, and she stood straighter, more confident. "We need to talk," Sophia said simply. "About what?" Margaret asked, though she already knew the answer would change everything. "About David. About his debts. About the people who are still looking for him, even after all these years." Sophia's voice was calm, professional now, like she was discussing business. "About why I'm really here." Margaret felt the world shifting beneath her feet. Everything she had built, everything she had protected, was about to be threatened by this young woman who had fooled them all. The oil in the pan was smoking heavily now, spitting and crackling with dangerous heat. Margaret looked at it, then at Sophia, and made a decision that would change everything. If Sophia wanted to play games with her family's safety, she was about to learn that Margaret Wilson hadn't become a billionaire by backing down from fights. "I think," Margaret said slowly, "that you should leave my house. Now." Sophia laughed, a sound completely different from the gentle laughter Margaret had been hearing for weeks. "Oh, Mrs. Wilson, I'm not going anywhere. In fact, I think you'll find that I'm going to be staying for a very long time." That's when Margaret knew that everything she had feared was true. and the real battle for her family's future was about to begin. Margaret's hand trembled as she stared at Sophia, who was no longer pretending to be the innocent nanny she had hired. The young woman stood in the kitchen doorway with a confidence that made Margaret's skin crawl. "What do you want?" Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sophia moved closer to the stove where the oil was still bubbling dangerously. $20 million, she said as casually as if she were asking for a glass of water. "And I want it within 48 hours. Margaret almost laughed at the absurdity of it. 20 million? Are you insane? Even if I wanted to give you that kind of money, I couldn't access it that quickly. Are you insane? Are you insane? Are you insane? Oh, but you can," Sophia replied, pulling out her phone. She showed Margaret a series of photos that made her blood turn to ice. Pictures of David meeting with men in expensive suits outside a casino in Las Vegas. Pictures of him signing documents. Pictures of him looking scared and desperate. "These were taken 3 months ago," Sophia explained. "Your husband has been gambling again, Mrs. Wilson. Big time. And he's been losing. Badly." Margaret felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. David had promised her that his gambling days were over. They had been to counseling together, he had joined support groups, and she had trusted him completely. For 15 years, she had believed he was cured. "You're lying," she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew Sophia was telling the truth. It explained so many things that hadn't made sense recently. David's nervousness, his sudden interest in their financial accounts, the way he had been avoiding her calls during business trips. "I wish I was," Sophia said, putting her phone away. "But your husband owes some very dangerous people a lot of money. More money than he could ever repay on his own. That's where you come in." Margaret's mind was racing, trying to process this nightmare. "Who are you? Who do you work for?" Sophia smiled. But there was no warmth in it. "Let's just say I work for people who don't like to lose money. People who have been very patient with David, but whose patience is running out. The nanny agency, your references, all fake, but very well done. It took months to set up, but it was worth it to get close to your family." Sophia glanced around the expensive kitchen. "You've built quite an empire here, Mrs. Wilson. It would be such a shame if something happened to it." The threat was clear, and Margaret felt a surge of protective fury. These people had invaded her home, threatened her children, and now they wanted to destroy everything she had worked for because of David's weakness. "My daughters," Margaret said. "They have nothing to do with this. Children are so precious." Sophia agreed, her voice taking on a disturbing sweetness. "So innocent. So vulnerable. It would be terrible if anything happened to them. Because their father made some bad choices." That was the moment Margaret snapped. The hot oil was right there, bubbling and spitting with dangerous heat. Without thinking, she grabbed the handle of the pan and swung it toward Sophia. But Sophia was younger and faster. She dodged to the side, and most of the oil missed her, splattering across the expensive marble floor and cabinets. A few drops hit Sophia's arm, and she cried out in pain and anger. "You crazy woman!" Sophia shouted, backing away and clutching her burned arm. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Margaret advanced on her, still holding the empty pan. "Get out of my house. Get away from my family." But Sophia was already pulling out her phone, and Margaret heard the sound that would haunt her dreams. Sophia had been recording everything. "Perfect," Sophia said, her eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "Now I have you on video, attacking me with boiling oil. That should make the police report very interesting, don't you think?" Margaret realized she had made a terrible mistake. In her fury to protect her family, she had given Sophia exactly what she needed to destroy them. The recording would show Margaret attacking what appeared to be an innocent nanny. No one would believe the truth. "Delete that," Margaret demanded. "I don't think so," Sophia replied, backing toward the kitchen exit. "In fact, I think this changes our timeline. You now have 24 hours to get me the money, or this video goes to the police, the media, and child protective services. Margaret felt trapped like she never had before in her life. She was a woman who had always found solutions to every problem, who had built a business empire through intelligence and determination. But this situation seemed impossible to escape. "Even if I could get that kind of money," she said desperately, "how do I know you'll leave my family alone? How do I know this won't just be the beginning?" Sophia paused at the doorway, considering the question. "You don't. But I can tell you this much. If you don't pay, things will get much worse, for all of you. David's gambling debts are just the beginning of your problems." "What do you mean?" "Ask your husband about the Henderson project," Sophia said with a cruel smile. "Ask him about the money he stole from his business partners 5 years ago. Ask him about why Robert Henderson committed suicide." Margaret felt the color drain from her face. She remembered the Henderson project vaguely. It had been one of David's investment ventures that had gone bad around the time Emma and Lily were born. She had been so busy with the twins and growing her business that she hadn't paid much attention to the details. "David didn't steal anything," she said. But her voice lacked conviction. $3 million, Sophia continued relentlessly. David was supposed to invest it in a legitimate development project. Instead, he used it to pay off his gambling debts. When the project collapsed and the investors demanded their money back, Robert Henderson lost everything. His house, his marriage, his children's college funds. He hung himself in his garage 3 days before Christmas. Margaret's legs felt weak. She gripped the kitchen counter for support. "You're lying. The Henderson family has been looking for justice ever since. They hired private investigators. They filed lawsuits. But David had covered his tracks very well. At least, they thought he had." Sophia's smile grew wider. "But people leave traces, Mrs. Wilson. Digital footprints, paper trails, witness testimonies. We found them all. We? Robert Henderson's son Michael is all grown up now. He's a very successful businessman himself. And he's never forgotten what your husband did to his family. He spent years planning his revenge." Margaret's world was crashing down around her. Everything she thought she knew about her husband, about their life together, was built on lies and stolen money. "The $20 million isn't just for David's gambling debts," Sophia explained. "It's compensation for what the Henderson family lost. Plus interest. Plus payment for their pain and suffering. And if I pay it, what then? Then we disappear, and you never see us again. You can go back to your perfect life, though you might want to keep a closer eye on your husband's activities." Margaret looked around her beautiful kitchen, now splattered with oil and ruined by the violence of the last few minutes. Everything felt contaminated, poisoned by the truths Sophia had revealed. "I need to talk to David," she said finally. "Of course you do. But remember, Mrs. Wilson, you have less than 24 hours now. And if you try to run, if you try to call the police, if you try anything clever, this video will be released immediately. Your reputation, your business, your custody of your daughters, it will all be gone." Sophia walked toward the back door, then paused. "Oh, and Mrs. Wilson? You might want to clean up this mess before the girls come back. We wouldn't want them to ask difficult questions about what happened in here." After Sophia left, Margaret stood alone in her ruined kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of her life. The woman she had trusted with her children was gone, replaced by an enemy who held the power to destroy everything she cared about. She needed to find David immediately. She needed to hear the truth from his own mouth, no matter how much it hurt. And then, she needed to figure out how to save her family from the consequences of his crimes. But as Margaret looked at the oil-stained floor and burned cabinets, she realized that some stains could never be completely cleaned away. Some secrets, once revealed, changed everything, forever. And some prices were too high to pay, no matter how much you loved someone. The sound of her daughters laughing in another room reminded her that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for their future, their safety, and their right to grow up without paying for their father's sins. Margaret Wilson had built an empire through determination and ruthless intelligence. Now she would need every bit of that strength to save what mattered most to her, even if it meant making choices that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Margaret found David in his home office, staring at his computer screen with the hollow look of a man who had lost everything. When he saw her standing in the doorway, his face crumpled with shame and defeat. "She told you, didn't she?" he whispered, without looking up. Margaret stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. The children were upstairs, hopefully far enough away that they wouldn't hear what was about to happen. "Tell me about Robert Henderson," Margaret said, her voice deadly calm. David's hands shook as he covered his face. "Oh, God. Margaret, I never meant for any of this to happen. I was going to pay it back. I swear I was. $3 million, David. You stole $3 million from a man who trusted you. And he killed himself because of it. It wasn't supposed to be stealing." David looked up at her with desperate eyes. "I was going to invest the money exactly like I promised. But then I had this sure thing at the casino, this poker game where I knew I could double the investment. I thought I could give Robert back $6 million instead of 3. Robert back $6 million. Margaret felt sick to her stomach. "But you lost it all." "Not at first. I actually won big that first night. But then I kept playing. And..." David's voice broke. "I lost everything. The original $3 million, plus another $2 million of our own money that I borrowed against our house." Margaret sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. $5 million. You lost $5 million gambling. I tried to fix it. I took out more loans. I sold some of my investments without telling you. I even considered robbing a bank." David laughed bitterly. "Can you imagine? A suburban dad planning a bank robbery because he was too much of a coward to tell his wife the truth. How did you cover it up?" "I created fake documents showing that the Henderson project had failed due to market conditions. I made it look like Robert's investment was lost through legitimate business risks. He believed me at first, but when he started asking more detailed questions, you let him think his money was gone forever." David nodded miserably. "He lost his house first. Then his wife left him and took the kids. He came to my office one day, begging me to help him understand what had happened. He said he couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. And I looked him in the eye and lied to him again." Margaret thought about Robert Henderson hanging in his garage, driven to despair by David's lies and theft. "Did you go to his funeral?" "Did you?" "Yes." David's voice was barely audible. His son, Michael, was there. Just 18 years old, having to bury his father and be strong for his younger sister. He looked at me across the grave. And I knew that someday he would figure out the truth. And now he has. Sophia works for him. She's been in our house for weeks, gathering evidence, recording conversations, building a case against me. David opened his laptop and showed Margaret a series of emails. "Michael Henderson is a successful businessman now, just like Sophia said. He owns a private investigation company, among other things. He's been hunting me for years." Margaret read through the emails, each one more damning than the last. Bank records, witness statements, digital forensics, reports. Michael Henderson had built an airtight case against David. The gambling debts Sophia mentioned, are those real too? David nodded shamefully. "I started gambling again 6 months ago. Small amounts at first, just to feel something other than guilt about Robert. But it escalated quickly. In 17, 1, 2, the people I owe money to now are connected to organized crime. They don't accept excuses or payment plans. How much do you owe them? $4 million, plus interest that keeps growing every day." Margaret did the math in her head. $4 million in current gambling debts, plus the original $3 million stolen from Robert Henderson, plus 15 years of interest and compensation. $20 million was actually a conservative demand. "We could fight this," she said slowly. "Hire the best lawyers, claim that the statute of limitations has expired, argue that there's no concrete proof." "There's proof," David interrupted. Michael Henderson has everything. Bank records showing the money transfer, security footage from the casino, testimony from people who saw me gambling with cash that same week. If this goes to court, I'll go to prison for decades. Margaret looked at her husband, really looked at him, and saw a weak man who had destroyed multiple families through his selfishness and cowardice. The love she had felt for him for 15 years was being replaced by something cold and bitter. "What about us?" she asked. "What about Emma and Lily? If I go to prison, you can divorce me. Take the girls and start over somewhere else. You're strong enough to build a new life. And leave you to face the consequences alone?" David met her eyes for the first time since she had entered the room. "It's what I deserve, Margaret. I've been living with this guilt for 15 years. Maybe it's time to face the truth." Margaret stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where her daughters had been playing innocently just hours before. Everything about their life was built on blood, money, and lies. How could she continue to live here, knowing what she now knew? But then she thought about Emma and Lily. They were innocent in all of this. They deserved a chance at a normal life, not the chaos that would come if their father went to prison and their family was destroyed by scandal. "I can get the money," she said quietly. "Margaret, no. I won't let you destroy everything you've built because of my mistakes." She turned back to face him. "It's not your choice anymore, David. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for our daughters." Margaret pulled out her phone and made a call to her chief financial officer. Within 2 hours, she had liquidated enough assets to transfer $20 million to an offshore account number that Sophia provided. Sophia returned to the house that evening, no longer pretending to be a nanny. She was accompanied by a man in his 30s, with cold eyes and an expensive suit. Margaret knew immediately that this was Michael Henderson. "Mrs. Wilson," he said politely, as if they were meeting at a business conference instead of conducting extortion in her living room. "I want you to know that this gives me no pleasure. But my father deserves justice, even if it comes 15 years too late." Margaret looked at the man whose life David had destroyed. "I'm sorry for what happened to your family. But my children are innocent in this. Yes, they are. Which is why you'll be happy to know that once this transaction is complete, you'll never see or hear from us again. The video Sophia recorded will be destroyed, and all evidence of your husband's crimes will disappear." "What about the gambling debts?" Michael smiled grimly. "Those will be paid from the same account. Consider it a package deal." Sophia handed Margaret a tablet showing the completed wire transfer. $20 million had been moved from Margaret's business accounts to an untraceable offshore fund. "It's done," Sophia said simply. Michael nodded and stood to leave. But before he reached the door, he turned back to Margaret. "Your husband is a weak man, Mrs. Wilson. But you're strong. Don't let his weakness destroy the rest of your life." After they left, Margaret found David in the kitchen, cleaning up the oil stains from her earlier confrontation with Sophia. He looked up when she entered, his eyes red with tears. "Is it over?" he asked. "The money is gone," Margaret replied. $20 million. Gone because of your lies and your gambling and your cowardice. I'll pay you back. I'll get a job. I'll work for the rest of my life, if I have to." Margaret shook her head. "No, David, you won't." She handed him a manila envelope that she had prepared while he was cleaning. Inside were divorce papers and a restraining order. "You have 24 hours to leave this house," she said calmly. "You'll have supervised visitation with the girls once a week, but you're not allowed to live here anymore. If you violate the restraining order, if you try to contact me except through lawyers, if you gamble even $1, I'll release everything I know about your crimes to the authorities myself." David stared at the papers, his face pale with shock. "Margaret, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We're a family." "We were a family," Margaret corrected him. "But families are built on trust and honesty. You destroyed both of those things years ago. What will you tell the girls? The truth, in an age-appropriate way. That their father made some bad choices and needs to live somewhere else for a while. That sometimes adults make mistakes that have consequences. David broke down completely, sobbing like a child. But Margaret felt nothing for him anymore, except a cold determination to protect her daughters from any more of his destructive choices. 3 months later, Margaret had rebuilt her business and created new security measures to prevent future financial disasters. She had also started seeing a therapist to help her process the betrayal and trauma of discovering who David really was. Emma and Lily adjusted to their new reality better than Margaret had expected. They missed their father, but they seemed to sense that their home was more peaceful without his constant anxiety and hidden guilt. Margaret never hired another nanny. Instead, she restructured her work schedule to spend more time with her daughters personally. She wanted to be present for every conversation, every milestone, every moment of their lives. Sometimes, late at night, Margaret would stand in her renovated kitchen and remember the day Sophia had revealed the truth about her marriage. The oil stains were gone. The burned cabinets had been replaced. But the memory remained. She had lost $20 million, her marriage, and her trust in the person she had loved most. But she had gained something more valuable. The knowledge that she was strong enough to protect her children from anything, even the consequences of their father's crimes. Margaret Wilson had always known she was capable of building empires. What she hadn't known was that sometimes the most important thing you can build is a new life from the ashes of an old one. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from everything you thought you wanted in order to save everything that truly matters.